Hi, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is the third installment of my class on the Hieroglyphic Monad of Dr. John Dee of London. I'm using this edition, the recent translation from Ouroboros Press by myself and Dr. Nancy Turner. I have to tell you at the outset here, I'm cheating a little in this third one. I'm breaking it into three parts, and the reason for that is I've learned that some people in Australia and New Zealand have had difficulty getting a copy of this edition, and the Hamilton Jones translation, which is not very good anyway, doesn't have the letter. Some of you don't have access to Yostin's translation, which is much, much better, but it still has errors. So I'm putting the whole text of my translation in this video, though what you'll be missing is the wonderful formatting from Ouroboros Press. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with Dee's letter to King Maximilian. As I said in one of my earlier videos, if you get through this letter, you have gotten through the hardest part of understanding the hieroglyphic monad. In fact, it's going to be cake for you once you get through the letter until you get to about theorem 20. 1 through 19 will be easy. 20, 21 may be difficult. 23 and 24 aren't that bad. And then we'll talk about some other things after that. So John Dee's letter to King Maximilian, here we go. He will be talking about the monad glyph. You probably know what it looks like, but just to remind you, this is his monad glyph, which he will refer to as a hieroglyphic image. Okay. I'm assuming if you're taking this class, you know who John Dee is. You probably have seen this picture many, many times before. It's the undated Ashmolean portrait of him. But I think since he's writing to King Maximilian, we ought to take a moment to just establish who King Maximilian is, other than a really important guy who is a powerful ruler. Okay, but he is, first and foremost, a powerful ruler. When Dee writes this in 1564, Maximilian is the Habsburg king of Bohemia, Germany, Croatia, and Hungary. Google the House of Habsburg if you want to know more about that. 6 months after Dee gives him a copy of the Hieroglyphic Monad and has one printed by Silvius, Maximilian II is going to become the Holy Roman Emperor. That's very important. Dee, by the way, has attended his coronation as king in what is now Bratislava. Maximilian is named after his great-grandfather, also a Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian I, who was, on the one hand, a very warlike king, but also a very learned king of letters, a great patron of the art. He was himself an alchemist, knew all the great alchemists around at that time. It's easy to get contacts with people when you're the Holy Roman Emperor. He corresponded with Trithemius. Years later, Dee will go to a lot of effort and write back to William Cecil about how important Trithemius's work is, and then he wants a copy of it, and he copies the Stenographia himself. Maximilian is a patron of people like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, Pico della Mirandola, and probably most importantly, Albert Dürer. His reign has been called one of the most it's an image building reign. That is, he's a patron of the arts, and so artists make work that tend to be about great things that he has done. Of course, there's always another side of that great thing, and one thinks of the truism of history is often written by the winners. Maximilian's son is going to be Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who's in Prague when 2 decades later, when John Dee and Sir Edward Kelly come in as part of their continental adventure that yields the much more famous Enochian corpus. Rudolph II goes, he's the great-grandson of Maximilian I, and he goes to incredible lengths to get copy of some of Dürer's artwork that feature his great-great-grandfather, Maximilian. For instance, the Festival of the Rose Garlands, or Feast of the Rosaries, is one big example. And there's a whole brotherhood at that time, according to art historians, about a brotherhood of the Rose Garland. So let's move on. Oh, and why you don't want to piss off a powerful ruler should go without saying. But remember, it is in Prague that Dee, as a much older man, will go to Rudolph, give him a copy of the Hieroglyphic Monad, and basically say, "Look, I wrote this for your father." He offers to explain it. according to D, Rudolph doesn't pay much attention, but at some point D says, you know, you need to do these things or basically you're gonna sort of go to hell. And that was not a smart thing to do. Rudolph kicks him out of Prague and almost kicks him out of the Holy Roman Empire. So it's a good thing to flatter great leaders if you're living in the time of D. Let me just read the opening here and show you what I mean by flattery. So the beginning of his letter: to the most excellent majesty of the illustrious King Maximilian, John D. of London wishes a most fortunate reign. And then he writes, the two possible reasons which might impel a man of my condition to present so great a king as yourself so small a gift have indeed inspired me for this purpose, namely the goodwill I feel towards your majesty and the great rarity and high quality of the homage I wish to pay you, though the gift itself be small in size. But there's more. Maximilian, your many admirable virtues have awakened in me an everlasting goodwill and harmony that I can now draw upon at all times. Your virtues truly are so rare that people who have not witnessed them with their own eyes must yet be moved by their faith to believe the extraordinary, though very true reports of others. All right, let's look at some key points here. I've already mentioned this is a typical pattern of flattering the king, although he's going to flatter him in a particular way as a Neoplatonic philosopher king. Think Plato's Republic. Also, the word that he uses for the gift is an unusual one in Latin. He uses the word munus. Usually you'd call it a donum. A munus is a specific type of gift. You might think of it as more as an homage or an offering. Okay, now watch this next thing he does. Throughout this letter, and indeed throughout the theorems, D is going to suggest that his monad glyph, if it's properly understood, is going to awaken virtue in the person trying to understand it. One of those virtues will be the Platonic idea of the good, the bonitatis. Well, Maximilian's presence seems to have affected D in a similar way, right? He says that people who haven't witnessed his virtues with their own eyes must yet be moved by their faith to believe the extraordinary, though very true reports of others. And then he's going to give his personal testimonial. Yet there are those who in your presence, like D, have carefully contemplated your orations. They too find it difficult to find the proper speech and diction. They are racked by a poverty of expression insufficient to match their desire to speak about the extent of your virtue. They tremble. By the way, if I have any speech problems in these classes, which I probably have, it's the monad having that effect on me. Sometimes it makes it hard for me to get the right word right and I stutter a little. Just letting you know. Okay, the reason for this, the extent of his virtue, the reasons for this were most illuminated to me in multiple ways as an eyewitness only last September when I spent some time in Pressburg in your Hungarian kingdom. Pressburg is what's now Bratislava. D was there, as I mentioned, for the coronation. I also want to talk about this word. Different forms of it in Latin are used. Rarity, rare, raritatis. It's often throughout the hieroglyphic monad, it's synonymous with both the theorem and the monad glyph. Okay, so the structure of this first third of the letter will be as follows. D is going to greet the king. You just heard that. Then he's going to give a complex version of the Pythagorean why. I've got a whole video below on that wordplay if you want to see it, but I'll also talk about it here in an abbreviated form. He's going to tell Maximilian why he's a ruler inspired by spirit, a true philosopher king. And that's important because that means he can understand this great work. Because D is going to explain that his monad symbol, if properly studied, is going to imbue a capable reader, and of course the king is a capable reader, with the good, with the bonitatis. He also is going to tell us that this is a kind of composition never seen before, and I'd say maybe never seen since either. It's quasi-mathematical, it's alive, it's capable of restoring symbols that are long gone back to life. Because it's alive, it also will imbue other dead symbols with life and communicate across languages and nationalities. He says his monad glyph was sent by Jehovah. to either create a new discipline within this sacred art of written composition, or by his counsel revive one that has become extinct and wholly forgotten in human memory. He is restoring a kind of what Dee might call an Adamic art. Remember, I've talked in earlier videos about the context for this. And one of the things Dee is very interested in is sacred languages, particularly languages that he feels are coming from the one. He defines that both Neoplatonically and, of course, as an apocalyptic Christian who is into Christian Kabbalah. So he's going to explain that the effect that exposure to and understanding of his monad will have upon a variety of learned people, and he'll give a whole catalog of professions. In this video, we're going to get as far as grammarians. He'll pick up that thread again in the next section. He says he's going to explore sacred alphabets of 3 languages, by which he means Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, because they contain great mysteries, including the mysteries of creation. Note that Plato's Timaeus, of course, uses ancient Greek, as do, well, all the geometers he uses, and he'll also refer to some ancient Greek philosophers. And the New Testament that of Dee's time is not the King James edition of the Bible. That's years to come. It's mainly a Greek New Testament if you are someone as learned as Dee. Also, Hermetic Kabbalah, of course, uses Hebrew, as does the Hebrew Bible, and the Latin Vulgate Bible and his letter are in Latin. So we're going to continue on in his letter. After he has flattered Maximillian, he continues on saying this. He says, about the gift, meaning his hieroglyphic monad, about the gift so slight in bulk and the rarity of its words, I would like to say a few things as briefly as I can. It occurred to my searching mind that the course of human life can be divided into 2 diverse courses of destiny, of which most enter the second. These 2 courses are going to form a Y, and we're going to see his Pythagorean Y in a moment. I also want to touch on what he means by rarity again. It means something rare, of course, but it also can mean something very thin, like for a book, the monad is thin. It can also mean succinct prose, but succinct prose into which lots of meaning is packed, as is surely true of the theorems. So when he says, it occurred to my searching mind, in Latin, the word for mind also means soul. And even more so in Dee's prized ancient Greek sources, reference to mind and soul are usually synonymous, though in English you have to translate it one way or another. So we'll continue on here, right here. As soon as the running of infancy and childhood passes, the youth entering the next race feels his mind twisted by option, then hesitating somewhat, standing at that crossroads. All kinds of meanings packed in crossroads, but you can figure that one out on your own, I think. With little judgment, he must at last decide which path of this Y to take. Some, indeed those captivated by truth and virtuous love, will devote themselves with all their energy to the pursuit of philosophy, while others, enticed by worldliness and inflamed with burning ambition, cannot but lead the lives of alluring seekers after gain, pledging themselves and all their energy to pleasure after profit. Now, he's going to have numbers in the margin. This next group is divided into a group of 3, which is a tetrad and will be very important in his theorems. So the first of the 3, he says, of these latter, that is the seekers after gain, you can find 1,000 examples. Yet where are those for whom philosophy is their sincere and wholehearted work? You can hardly find even one who has begun to taste the fundamental truths of natural philosophy. What then of celestial forces and action? Of course, Dee has written another whole book, the Proponomata Aphoristica, that he sent to Mercator, looking at celestial forces and actions. And he thinks that is a fundamental teaching that you should know before you learn anything else. In fact, that's what Proponomata Aphoristica means, even though people have tended to treat it as a manual for navigation. So after this, Dee is going to launch into a graphic that you'll see in about 2 more slides, or actually maybe the next one. And as I mentioned, I've made a whole separate video on it. So he's appealing again to Maximillian to be a philosopher king. So this is one we just read. What's number 2? It's this. He says, even out of all those scholars who have dedicated themselves enthusiastically and entirely to wisdom, the Republic of Letters, remember Maximillian I, the Rex Literati, the philosopher king rules over the Republic of Letters. So the Republic of Letters can muster only 1 in 1,000 who will have deeply and fully studied them, their hidden causes, and their rising, stationing, and setting. What is rising, stationing, and setting? Well, the celestial forces. Think of how planets rise and set. Venus is the morning or evening star, or think of the fixed stars. So he's making that the premier cause he's looking at. Let me talk a little bit about these words that I've highlighted in gold. Obviously, they're not highlighted in gold in the original. I'm highlighting them as things that I want to talk about. Where are those is going to be a poetic allusion I'll get back to in a moment. But when he talks here about one does not mean the number one. One as a person or one as anything is often capitalized, and we might ask why. Most obviously, if you take the path he's talking about to be a philosopher king, or to adepthood, as he shows in his graphic, the idea is all the universe is combined in your person and you're aware of that. Okay, when he says 1 in 1,000 right there, that's what we would call a denary number. He's going to refer to that in the theorems also. That's basically anytime you have the Arabic numeral 1 with a bunch of zeros after it, or you've got a ratio where 1 is the numerator and the denominator is some other denary number. Okay, I'm going to come back to that in just a couple of minutes. Let's read the next part of this, the third. What then should we expect of this man, this 1 in 1,000 man, who, having overcome such difficulties, has aspired to apprehend the supra-celestial virtues and metaphysical influences as well? That is not just what you see, but what is beyond what you see in the sky, what is above the stars. Where in this place, in this entire terrestrial orb, in these deplorable times, should we hope to find even one magnanimous hero? Supra-celestial, as you may know, means above the heavens. So not just what you see, but what is beyond what you see. If you remember his context of the Timaeus, the Sefer Yetzirah, what is giving birth to those things? All right, where in this place? In Latin, he says ubi hunc. This is a beautiful poetic play that you can't really translate, so I'm just going to explain it. There's a poetic technique in Latin called the ubi sunt motif, like ubi sunt que ante nos fuerant. Where are those who went before us? Where are the great warriors? Where are the great leaders? Where are the great philosophers? Where are those who embody the good if you're a Neoplatonist? You even see this motif in Old English as old as Beowulf. And by the way, the father of the guy whose library Beowulf came from, Robert Cotton, was a friend of John Dee's, just a little literary footnote there. So when Dee writes here, ubi hung, it's going to rhyme with the usual answer, ubi nunc, where are they now? And the implicit answer is they're gone. They're not here anymore. So Dee is also implicitly saying, but wait, there is someone, I'm here. Okay. He is offering to be, or says he is, that one magnanimous hero. And hero, you know, you can get into a whole thing of what is a hero, but it's also an allusion to the name of a famous hero, Hero of Alexandria, who's the greatest Greek engineer and experimenter of antiquity. So, continuing on, for if we follow the progress of our proportion of 1,000, which was not taken randomly, we ought to expect that this unique and most fortunate specimen is 1 in a million among true philosophers, or 1 in 1,000 million men. All right, the actual way that this appears is he's making things multiples of the myriad. How is he doing that? How is, for example, 1,000 a multiple of the myriad? Well, remember up here, we had a denary number. So it's not a multiple of 1, it's a multiple of 10, a denary number. Okay, And we could have fractions too, but it's not. So you multiply 10 times one of these and you get a denary number. The word myriad, which is a Latin word that comes directly from ancient Greek, is a literal word for 10,000, but it also means a really large number of things. So you could also look at this as him saying that this unique and fortunate specimen is one in a myriad of a myriad. I mean, there's hardly any person like this, especially of the common sort. So to demonstrate this rarity, we present the hieroglyphic image of the Pythagorean letter. I'm going to talk more about the hieroglyphic image in the next slide. If your excellency gazes upon it intently, what you see will offer itself up to greater things, and still greater mysteries will present themselves for your consideration, shown in this way from our cosmopolitan theories. Here's the end of what I just read before. So a cosmopolitan is basically a humanist. A humanist is someone who speaks Latin, writes Latin, because that's the common language of all the Christian European countries and the British Isles. And so it's someone who has gone to all these different countries and learned their most important things. They're a cosmopolitan. Now, later it becomes a reference to a particular alchemist, and this is in a time a couple generations later. There is a cosmopolitan alchemist who is mysterious and can do great things. But I only mention that because alchemy is one of the things that you might be learning about, philosophical alchemy. Okay, a hieroglyphic image of the Pythagorean letter. I just want to point out here that this is not an Egyptian hieroglyph. There's not an understanding of Egyptian hieroglyphs. People know they exist, and we could have another whole video, though, on the kind of entertaining way that some hieroglyphs are interpreted in the Renaissance. But basically, what D means by a hieroglyphic letter is a figure that represents a complex or a very packed idea. This is how, in the original Latin, his Pythagorean Y looks. So what you might notice about this is the top of it is in all caps in ancient Greek. It's also labeled something in Latin. It has numbers that are all denary numbers, or else they're multiples of 7. And he's using Arabic numbers just like we do. So let's look at how you might render this in something that is more accessible to English speakers. Oops, I've already talked about that. And the rare tree, just to remind you, the tree of life is one of the big contexts for what he's talking about. There are some critics that say Dee did not know the Sefer Yetzirah, and that's just BS. There is no way to explicate some of his works without that. And one of the people, Athanasius Kircher, a generation later, who most relies on Dee's work, uses the very tree used by commonly now among Hermetic and Christian Kabbalists. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this briefly, but I have a whole video on this again that is below. If you go this path, it's going to lead you to anxiety, deception, vice. If you're a ruler, what will you turn into? A tyrant. Tyrants are bad. If you go this way, first of all, it seems that you don't keep aging if you go this way, but also you'll become first a philosopher, a wise man, an adept, and then if you're a ruler, you'll be the philosopher king, someone who is inspired by spirit. All right, that's all I'm going to say about this here, more below. Usually you don't see, in fact, nowhere else do you see a Pythagorean letter that is divided up like this. Sometimes people think it's called that because of its similarity to the ancient Greek upsilon, but again, more in my other video. So D just made 3 points. He's about to make 8 more. Are you ready? If you're not, there's no shame in pausing this video, getting some water, and coming back, but I'm going to keep going. All right. Here's his next 8 points, or his setup for them. He says, most merciful king who excels and abounds in knowledge of the greatest arts and most secret knowledge, you may well easily conjecture what grade of this threefold philosophical rarity. Why is he so interested in threefold things? Well, remember, a big context here is the emerald tablet of thrice great Hermes, or Hermes Trismegistus. Okay, you may well easily conjecture what grade of this threefold philosophical rarity just explained do I wish this gift of mine to be, and to be ranked by you. Okay, number 1. If I set it at the deepest and first class of philosophy, I do not think that I am being arrogant. D is nothing if not unabashed about his own talent. He flatters the king, but he doesn't flatter the king by saying, oh, I'm just a stupid subject. No, he is the first class of philosophers. To continue. And if occasionally its lofty head, what is that? That's the part of the monad glyph that is the circle with the moon coming through. If occasionally its lofty head is determined to rise high off the ground, I dare to promise your highness that you will have derived from the work enjoyment of the same grade of goodness. Again, that's bonitatis. That's the Platonic idea of the good. Since he has previously set the context that Maximillian is or should aspire to be the Christian philosopher king, the king inspired by spirit, D is repeatedly going to invoke this concept from the Republic, the form of the good, because that's what allows the philosopher in training to advance to be a philosopher king by his Pythagorean Y. Number 2, and this is also a gift with rare texture. You will find woven into my work a type of writing whose fine thread, so far as my knowledge of major written monuments extends, has never existed before now. By major work, written monument, he means a great philosophical work, and that implicitly is going to include works of geometry, works of grammar. If you remember the frontispiece, it looks like a big monument, 2 pillars. Oh, could those be pillars on the tree of life? Why, yes, they could. Continuing on, number 3, though I call this work hieroglyphic, he who persistently examines the nature of the thing itself will acknowledge that it has an inner light and strength that is quasi-mathematical, an extraordinary rarity of its kind. That is implying it's alive with some sort of divine force. Is he an animist, a pantheist? Well, not overtly, but one of his content, well, maybe overtly here, actually. But in the Timaeus, remember, that's Plato's dialogue with Timaeus, the geometric creation story. And in that, everything that exists is alive. Some things that are alive are more perfect than other things, but everything is alive. So number 4, after all, is it not a rare thing that all of the astronomical symbols and vulgar planetary symbols, instead of being dead and dumb and up until now nearly barbaric marks, are now imbued with immortal life, and so can express their special meaning most eloquently to those of every language or nationality? The mystical symmetries belonged on the next slide, sorry, but I'm not going to start over. Well, I will explain it now, actually. So the mystical symmetries, something is symmetric if you can flip it on its axis, right? So a circle is symmetric. You can flip it on any axis. But in his monad symbol, you have a cross of the elements. You can flip that. You can flip most of the monad on 2 axes and all of the monad on at least 1 axis. So I do want to talk about this, all right? They can speak to people who understand the concepts. I mean, this is very, Eurocentric, Abrahamic religion centric. They basically are going to speak to people who know his context. That is a Neoplatonic interpretation of Greek geometry, which is absorbed into Christianity at the Renaissance, the Tree of Life, Genesis, and the New Testament. If you understand those things in the way he does, then it will speak to you. And since not everyone does, I am making these videos. Okay, we've been through 4. Let's go on to 5. Here's where we get to the mystical symmetries I just talked about. He will say, now too, another rareness has been added by the most optimal hieroglyphic argument. The external bodies of these symbols have been restored to their mystical symmetries. It is as if they were already depicted in this way in an age gone by, or even, if you will, such that our great forefathers would have wished that in the future they would have been depicted in this way. What he's doing with his odd Latin structure and verb tense is really similar to what they do in ancient Greek mathematics, which I talked about in an earlier video as the helping hand. It's the idea that you're working out a proof and in the future you do it just perfectly. Why? Because it's matching with this perfect form that existed. And if you're talking about certain geometric forms associated with certain elements, it's what existed at the time of creation. Okay, talked about mystical symmetries. Let's go on to this next one here. To see in what new and fruitful way we have tried to do the same with how the signs of the dodecatemoria of the ecliptic show the flow of time is altogether novel and rare. What is this word? Well, first of all, it's been mistranslated constantly. What it is something called the dodecatemoria. It's a Latin word, very difficult to pronounce. It's the genitive form of a word that is associated with the dodecahedron in English, the dodecahedron being the secret, most sacred shape, the shape of the universe in Plato. So dodecatemoria are the subdivisions of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Today we do this with the different decans of the zodiac. But so you divide every 12 signs into 12 degrees. So you get this micro zodiac of 144, which you can imagine to D is a significant number. Each of them is going to be about exactly 2.5 degrees of the ecliptic. D is going to talk about them again in theorem 10 with the same unusual language in theorem 10. This same concept existed in Greek and Hebrew writing, according to scholars greater than myself. Let's continue on here. He's going to talk about Mercury. Now, I talked about this in the last video, and I talked about it in my wordplay video below about Stilbon and what is Mercury. You're going to have that same thing here with the sharp, pointy Mercury. So he says, indeed, the rarest thing of all is that this is confined in one hieroglyphic character, that of Mercury, tapered to a point and fortified. Truly, therefore, Mercury may properly be called the restorer and renewer of all astronomy, a messenger sent by Jehovah to either create a new discipline of the sacred art of written composition, or by his counsel revive one that has become extinct and wholly forgotten in human memory. Now, there was an idea in composition also, and believe me, to get my PhD, I had to study this in a thrilling field called writing and composition theory. It's that you're supposed to have something be symmetrical. The head is balancing the foot, and the arms are balancing each other, and so are the legs. You can think of this in that old 5-paragraph essay you were maybe forced to write at one time, where you write, I am going to talk about A, B, C, and then now I'm talking about A. Look, now I'm talking about B, and I'm talking about C. I have talked about A, B, C. So you're supposed to have symmetry in communication, but there usually isn't. So this is going to revive that kind of thing in a sacred art of written composition. We didn't, by the way, study John Dee's letter when I took all those courses. I wonder why. Anyway, he says, almost spontaneously will all interpretations of the hieroglyphs place themselves in our midst of their own accord. That is, they're going to self-organize to their original state of perfection, to their perfect form. How is that going to happen? Because to a Neoplatonist, that perfect form already exists. Now, there are probably some ceremonial magicians out there, and today we talk about that in terms of either magnetism or positive and negative spin, but it's the idea that, say, if you're casting 12 pentagram pentagons, that they may self-organize into a dodecahedron. But he's saying all of these forms are going to self-organize and put themselves basically where they should be around us of their own accord. And when they do that, what are they going to do? They're going to help us, or at least that is the argument that D will be making. He says this can be done gently with no force, or as it were, impropriety for our entire little work. After all, it wasn't an act of impropriety that he was calmed and made to feel harmonious by the munificent presence of King Maximillian. Moving on. The last one of these. Oh, I had a little note there before. Does 7 imply an 8? I just want you to think about that, because there is an idea that once you have all 7 of a thing, the 8 is a repetition of the cycle. If you're a musician, think of octaves. That is, you have all the notes, the 7th note, and then they repeat in an octave. Okay, so he is drawing on that kind of organization here when you get 8, which is summing up what came before. In this way, all who view this are London seal of Hermes. Another reason, by the way, why I say this is a Hermetic word. All who view our London seal of Hermes will feel compelled, for everlasting human memory, to acknowledge it as an exceeding rarity, impressed here without even one superfluous point and with not one point deficient in any way. Especially those knowledgeable in the disquisitions of philosophy and wisdom will most surely profit from this. In a like manner, grammarians will so testify, after here being advised how reasons exist for the shapes of letters, their positions, their places in the order of the alphabet, what binds them together, their numerical value, and many other things that must be considered when we explore the primary alphabets of the 3 languages. Notice he has put this whole thing in caps. He thinks it's important, and it is. The London seal of Hermes is the monad glyph, of course. So he talks here about grammarians. Now, in our very next section, you're going to get a sort of roll call or a list of other people who are going to benefit. And it's a wonderful list. It is mathematicians, arithmeticians, geometers, musicians, astronomers, people who make optical devices, people who are investigating weights and measures, people who are investigating spaces and voids, Kabbalists, including geometric Kabbalists, crystal gazers or scryers, and magical adepts, including Vorchadami. Remember, some of you have maybe seen my video on the Vorchadumi of Pantheus, and D will allude to that, of course. The primary alphabets of the 3 languages are Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Okay, that's enough for one day. In our next class, we're going to look at John Dee's comments on the Kabbalah. We're going to look at that parade of professions that can be helped by studying the monad. And actually, in the next class, we'll be looking at the most famous parts of his letter. Okay, thanks for joining me today. Hope to see you back again soon. Bye for now.